Hi, I'm Craig Baker and I chair the investment committee at Alliance Trust. I thought I'd just give a bit of an update as to performance in the calendar year of 2023 and to a certain extent the first quarter of 2024. So over the calendar year of 2023, we had a NAV return of 21.6%, a very strong return, some 6.3% ahead of our benchmark, the MSCI All Country World Index. Now, the very pleasing thing about that was that almost all of that came from stock selection, which is really what we're targeting in Alliance Trust. Now, stock selection came from a variety of areas within the market. So yes, we did have a couple of selective exposures within the Magnificent Seven that did particularly well for us. So Alphabet and Amazon being the two most obvious examples. But actually, stock selection really came from across the entire market, multiple different sectors, and actually from each of the underlying stock pickers. While some stock pickers did particularly well in 2023, others, as you would expect, struggled more because of their style. And so, interestingly, even if you consider GQG and Black Creek, two of our stock pickers that did less well in 2023, they each had some of the stocks that were the highest contributors to our returns. So Petrobras is a good example within GQG's portfolio. And another reason it's an interesting one to talk about is that the energy sector didn't do particularly well as a whole in 2023, but Petrobras did. And that was one that was one of the strongest performing stocks in the portfolio, a return in excess of 80%. Black Creek being the other example, I'd bring out the stock Ibara, perhaps, which is a Japanese industrial that's less well known. It's a business that's making environmental and industrial machinery such as pumps and turbines, and that has done particularly well also. Then you've got things like KKR in Vulcan's portfolio, a financial services business focused on alternative asset classes that was under a lot of pressure and had negative sentiment in the market. But Vulcan understood the strength of that business model, and that's really come through in the returns. GE is another one that Vulcan had, the big US industrial, not perhaps as an exciting a business as some of those in the Magnificent Seven, but returned some 85% in the calendar year of 2023. And then something like Booking.com that Metropolis owned as well. So quite a few different ideas there from multiple sectors that did particularly well. So as a reminder to everyone, the way Alliance Trust is structured is that it's a multi-manager concept. We have a number of stock pickers in the portfolio, some 10 as it stands today, who each try and find what they think are their 20 or less best ideas from anywhere in the world. Now, they tend to think long term. They're trying to understand the risk in the companies they're investing in more in terms of permanent loss of capital rather than risk relative to a benchmark or anything like that. And as a result, they tend to be long term focused on the fundamentals of the business. But one of the questions often get asked is, is it all about the fundamentals of the business? Is that all they look at? Are there other things that need to be thought about? And the reality is, of course, that no stock picker picks the stocks in a vacuum. You really need to understand not only the company and how it makes money, but also the industry dynamics in which it's operating and the global regulatory and political environment in which it's operating. You also need to understand how society and people's preferences are changing, how people perceive the brand of the company, how the world and the climate is changing, and what that will do to the input costs and sales of the company. So with any business, there's always a number of things that the manager will need to focus on. And the job really is to try and consider the possible risks that are open to that company, and then focus down on which of those really matter and are going to really drive the fundamentals of business over the next 3-5 years and beyond. And so that's what we're focusing on, is the skill of those stock pickers in doing exactly that. So maybe if we take an example that I mentioned of one of the better performing stocks, Petrobras, Clearly, that's an energy stock. That a lot will be in there about the supply and demand dynamics in the energy sector. But you also really have to understand the Brazilian political influences that are out there, the strength of the Brazilian currency, and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of the way we manage Alliance Trust, as I've said previously, we try and make sure that stock selection is driving everything. Of course, that doesn't mean that we ignore macro factors. Primarily, we're doing that by ensuring that the macro risks are not very large relative to the benchmark, but we're always monitoring them. And that's borne in mind when we bring managers into the portfolio. Perhaps one of the more interesting ones is one of the most recent managers that have come into the portfolio, Dalton. Now, they're a Japanese equity specialist. You might look at that and say, well, did you bring them in because you thought Japan looked attractive? Well, actually, yes and no. So in this particular case, we brought Dalton in because we thought the bottom-up stock selection opportunities in Japan looked very attractive indeed. And so that's what attracted us to bringing in a Japanese specialist. There's been quite a few changes in the way the stock market is regulated in Japan. The stock exchange there has actually mandated that companies that are running with a price to book value less than 1 have to explain what they're going to do to get that above that level. And so whilst we've had a number of years of a number of Japanese companies managing portfolios with large amounts of cash on their balance sheet, this has actually encouraged them to do more to be shareholder friendly. And we think that is particularly interesting as a stock selection opportunity in Japan. And in particular, when you look at the way Dalton manage portfolios, it really plays to their strengths as well, as they've always been trying to invest with companies that are aligned to shareholder interests and managing the cash on the balance sheet appropriately. Now, at the same time, we also think that Japan looks particularly attractive as a market, having underperformed the world indices for a number of years. And of course, the currency looks relatively attractive as well. But that was really an additional benefit rather than the primary reason for putting them in place. Now, I do get asked, given that Dalton's come into the portfolio quite recently, how have they performed? They have started well. They've slightly outperformed since they've been put in, but it's still early days. We think that this thesis is a long-term thesis that should play out over the course of a number of years. Now, the board of Alliance Trust have followed this progressive dividend policy for some time now, the idea being we want to increase dividends every year. And I'm pleased to say that for 2023, it marked the 57th consecutive year of increases in dividends. Often get asked, how confident are we that that will continue? Well, Alliance Trust has very significant revenue and capital reserves that it's able to pay dividends out of. And so we feel very confident that that will continue for a number of years to come. Now, that doesn't mean we have to change the way we manage the portfolio in order to make that possible. Because of those reserves, we're able to have some years where the income on the portfolio is naturally much higher than is needed for the dividend, building up reserves, and other years where we can dip into those significant reserves to pay that out. We're not forced to buy high dividend paying stocks when they don't look that attractive from a total return perspective. So the managers in the portfolio are not given a minimum amount of income that they have to produce in each individual year, but we're confident that over the long term, they will produce income that will easily pay out the dividends, particularly when allowing for the reserves that are in place. And I'm also pleased to say that the strong performance has continued into the first quarter of 2024 as well, not only in absolute terms with strong market returns in the first quarter, but also our level of outperformance has continued at the same sort of rate as we saw in the positive 2023 as well. Well, thanks very much for listening. If you'd like to hear any more information about Alliance Trust, there are plenty of videos and documents to be found on the Alliance Trust website. Thank you.